We talked about the emergence of complex societies in Mesoamerica with the Olmec of the Gulf Coast of Mexico. And then we talked about the emergence of urban settlements like Teotihuacan in the Valley of Mexico, the Central Highlands. And now we'll talk about the Maya. During the Classic period, the Maya were contemporaries of Teotihuacan and were influenced greatly by Teo. We will talk about how Teotihuacan used its military and commercial power to influence disputed successions and install kings of their choices in some Mayan cities. We'll talk about the competitive nature of the relationships between Maya city-states. And we'll talk about the collapse of the Maya at the end of the Classic period. The Maya area is shown in green on this map. Levanta is one of the Olmec sites that we talked about in the Gulf Coast. The area is shaded as pink. The Olmec were only found in the very southern portion of this pink area. Then we talked about Teotihuacan, near modern Mexico City, and the area is shown in brown. And now we'll talk about the Maya area. The Maya area includes parts of modern Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras, and El Salvador. And like today, this is not an area politically unified under one country. During the Maya era, it was not politically unified. We had lots of competitive city-states and networks of alliances and competition. The Maya region varies in elevation and in the distribution of certain resources. In the southern part of the Maya region, we have the highlands in modern-day Mexican state of Chiapas and in southern Guatemala. Then you have the southern lowlands and the northern lowlands up in the Yucatan Peninsula and the jungle area between the mountains and the drier northern portion of the Yucatan. Resources were differentially distributed. As you may notice, basalt, obsidian, and jade are found in the highlands, whereas cotton, cacao, and salt are found in many of the lowland areas. So there's a lot of trade and exchange linking communities in these different regions with access to different resources together. There's also competition between trade networks in order to control the flow of resources and maximize their community's share of these resources. Chronologically, the Maya period is divided into three broad periods: the pre-classic from 2000 BC to AD 250. And during this long period of time, there's the transformation of small-scale tribal farmers, first to small-scale chiefdoms, then to complex networks of chiefdoms, and then into the early states that would emerge during the terminal pre-classic. This is when writing and a system of rulership that was influenced by the Olmec developed between 400 and 300 BC. The Classic period from AD 250 to 750 is the period for which the Maya are best known. This was a time period of great monumental construction and the development of large cities. There was competition among alliances of different city-states, and these alliances were dominated by two opposing superpowers, Tikal and Calakmul. Successive periods of drought, degradation of the environment, and intensive warfare during the late pre-classic led to population decline, abandonment of centers, and the end of ruling dynasties. This is known as the Mayan collapse. However, it wasn't the end of the Maya. There is a post-classic period from 950 to 1540 with contact with the Spanish. And there's a shift in populations from these large classic period centers to smaller scale centers. And there also was a transformation of leadership from single autocratic king often to dual kings who were supported by a council of elite leaders who constrained the powers of the kings. The Maya did not disappear in the post-classic and still have not disappeared. There are several million Maya who still live in southern Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Belize. And Mayan languages are still the primary language spoken in many of these communities. And as we'll learn later, these contemporary Mayan communities have provided insights from their language to understanding their ancestors' written language. Tikal was one of the great superpowers during the Maya classic period, and in this artist's reconstruction we see an overview of the civic ceremonial core of the community. Covering nearly 5 square miles, there are several pyramids and plazas, raised platforms that support pyramids, that support temples on top of them, and towards the left you see the area that was an open marketplace, allowing the dispersed community that surrounded the city to come in and trade their wares. You can also see roadways leading out of the city on the upper left and in the lower left. These formal roadways often connected to smaller centers that were politically and economically dependent upon the larger centers where the roads originated. But Tikal was more than this urban core. For 40 square miles surrounding the city center was a urban to suburban to rural interface with very large populations that were integrated politically and economically in the city. While this artist's reconstruction captures the glory of the city center, it was probably not surrounded by unbroken forest. All of this area was heavily occupied, and any stands of forest remaining were heavily managed in order to provide either fruit or construction wood or fuel wood, but much of the area would have been cleared for settlement and agricultural production. With the decline of populations and their movement to new centers at the end of the Classic period, these Classic period centers were re-engulfed by the jungle, and they have since been discovered and explored, often having the jungle removed in order to expose and allow the reconstruction of these monumental features. Tikal's primary rival was Calakmul, another large center, which also would not have been surrounded by unbroken rainforest. It had a similarly large, dispersed community surrounding the urban core of the city, and much of the landscape was highly manipulated and transformed for agricultural production. The Great Pyramid of Calakmul is nearly as large as the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. You can see multiple levels and several stairways, and the foundations of a temple near the summit. Like the Pyramid of the Moon and the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan, most large Maya pyramids saw several episodes of construction, as subsequent kings would add on to the previous pyramid of their forefathers, building a larger and greater pyramid that built upon the foundations created by their predecessors. The dynasty at Calakmul claimed its right to rule because of their descent from the ruling dynasty at the late pre-classic center of El Mirador. And this right was passed down through a matrilineal line of descent. In contrast, their great rivals at Tikal claimed their right to rule because of a line of descent influenced by the kings of Teotihuacan. And some Maya scholars have suggested that the dynasty that ruled Tikal through much of the Middle and Late Classic period were descendants of the ruling class at Teotihuacan. Tikal and Calakmul were engaged in a long-term struggle to control the networks of alliances throughout the Maya region. At certain points, Tikal held the upper hand. At other times, Calakmul did. And at one point, one of Tikal's subsidiary states betrayed it and assisted Calakmul in the conquest of Tikal. Tikal was diminished for several generations, but rose again from its ashes, eventually to exact revenge upon those who lived in the city that had betrayed their ancestors. We know a lot about these networks of alliance and enmity based upon the large body of art and writing that the Maya left behind. New discoveries in the last 20 years have allowed great insights into understanding the nature of Maya writing, and our understanding of their writing allows us to see into their lives and understand their histories and genealogies as they recorded them. These texts provide information on the ruling dynasties of different city-states, the alliances they had with dynasties in other city-states, the relationships they had through intermarriage in order to seal these alliances, and also the wars fought between different cities. This stela from the site of Waka commemorates intermarriages between the ruling lineage of Waka and the ruling dynasty at Calakmul, intermarriages that occurred in 679 and again 42 years later in order to seal again this relationship between the cities. These princesses brought with them great powers that were bestowed upon the city and the dynasty that they married into. These powers are shown on the palanquins, the litters that they were carried into the city upon, which are decorated with representations of their powers. On the left, the power of creation, and on the right, the power of war. Mayan kingdoms were feudal systems. The king had relatives, those who had more distant claims to the throne, his various brothers, half-brothers, cousins, aunts and uncles, others who were related to his father, the previous king, or to his mother, the previous queen, and these various other lineages of the ruling dynasty served as subsidiary nobles, holding estates and titles, but being responsible for paying tribute to the king. There were also other subsidiary noble lineages, ones that were more distantly related, or not even related at all to the king. All were required to pay tribute that they extracted from the peasants that worked the lands beneath them. On this Mayan ceramic vessel, we see a king seated on his throne within his palace, and lords have come, kneeling before him, presenting the tribute. Some of the tribute is shown in the central portion of the painting as stacks of finished textiles, and a bowl above of blood offerings that the nobles have made in order to seal their alliance to their king. Warfare was an essential component of the competition between city-states, and it was used to create and maintain tributary domains that would allow for the flow of resources and the accumulation of resources by the ruling king of a community. Most of the warriors who engaged in battle were drawn from the ruling class, and warfare provided an opportunity for social advancement for those of minor noble lineages. In addition to its political and economic role, warfare was very important ritually as well, in order to obtain captives for sacrifice. On this vessel, we see some bound captives before the king who has captured them, and they watch in great dismay as one of the warriors of this king dances before them, bearing the still bleeding severed head of one of their compatriots. This scene was depicted on a Maya cylinder vase, and vases like this were actually serving and drinking vessels that were used for consuming cacao, chocolate. They made a hot beverage from the cacao beans, but this would not be like the hot chocolate you and I are familiar with. It was not sweetened. It would have been very bitter, and in some cases it may have been flavored with chili peppers. These cacao beverages were usually consumed in ritual contexts from these very special vases, which were often commissioned by the king or other nobles and then gifted to those who pledged their allegiance to them, and were used to seal these alliances between a patron and his client. Many vases have dedicatory texts that identify the patron and the client to whom the vase was gifted. The universe needs blood, human blood, in order to maintain its motion, to maintain its vitality, and to sustain all life. And humans not only had to make sacrifices of captives, the kings themselves had to make sacrifices of themselves, to make sacrifices of their own blood in order to maintain the balance and harmony of the cosmos. Here we see King Bird Jaguar IV of Yaxchilan making a blood sacrifice. You can see blood streaming from his hands into the basket below, where it is caught upon paper, and then this paper soaked in blood would be burned in order to carry the offering upwards. These blood offerings were drawn from different parts of the body with an obsidian blade, or in many cases a stingray spine. A hole would be pierced in the lip, the tongue, the ear, or in many cases, such as in this one, in the foreskin of the penis, a very symbolically powerful location of the body related to procreation and fertility. Bird Jaguar performs this with one of his subordinates, the subsidiary lord who rules over one of these cities within his domain. Like their earlier Olmec counterparts, Maya kings were powerful because of their ability to connect the heavens and the earth and the underworld, to be a personification of the axis mundi, connecting different dimensions together, being able to move between these dimensions, being able to access the supernatural powers of the underworld, to communicate with the gods and the ancestors. This is a royal scepter that had been carved from shell. It had been held along the leg of the individual, and it depicts the god Ka'oil, the god of rulership, and he is shown with one leg transforming into a serpent and breathing fire, connecting downwards to the underworld, and as he looks upward, fire erupts from a kilt that is embedded in his forehead, connecting him to the upper world. It shows that kings are this axis mundi that provides this connection and mediation with the supernatural powers of the universe. But it wasn't just the kings that had to make sacrifices of their own blood. In many cases, their wives were required to sacrifice their blood in order to consecrate particular rites. Here, Shield Jaguar III of Yaxchilan holds a torch above his wife as they are deep inside of a temple, which is very cave-like and dark. And there she is performing a bloodletting rite in order to celebrate the birth of their son in 709. Lady Dawn Shark draws a thorned rope through a perforation in her tongue, and you can see scrolls of blood on her lips and cheeks. The blood is being caught on pieces of paper. In the basket before her, you can see folded up pieces of paper with spots of blood upon them. These paper offerings would then be burned. Here, Lady Dawn Shark is holding a basket with the paper offerings soaked in blood, and before her she has a censer that she is placing them in to burn. From the smoke emerges a vision serpent that bears within it an ancestral spirit. So emerging from the mouth of this great powerful vision serpent is the ancestral spirit of progenitor Jaguar, the founder of the royal dynasty that her husband is now the king of. And this rite was performed in AD 681 upon the accession of Shield Jaguar III. In this image, we see Lady Dawn Shark after she has performed a bloodletting rite. You can see the blood scrolls on her cheeks by her mouth, and she is bringing to Shield Jaguar his armor, a carved wooden helmet depicting a jaguar that he will wear into battle. Shield Jaguar is holding a spear, much of which has been lost to the ravages of time, but he also wears special quilted cotton armor that Mayan warriors used in order to cushion the blow from clubs and absorb the impact from projectiles. And this was a pre-battle consecration in order to empower his armor and his weapons and protect him when he was in battle because of the sacrifice made by his wife. But it wasn't just kings and queens and other nobles that were required to make blood sacrifices. Even commoners made sacrifice of their own blood in order to bring fertility to their own lands, in order to bring health and success to their own families. It was just essential that kings and queens perform these rites to benefit the entire community. While the ruling dynasty of Karakol claimed its right to rule from its descent from the ruling dynasty of the pre-classic center El Mirador, and before that its relationship to Olmec kings, Tikal seems to have claimed a different line that provides its legitimacy. There is a growing body of textual and iconographic evidence that suggests that the ruling dynasty at Tikal was installed through might by an army from Teotihuacan, that Teotihuacan likely interfered within a successional dispute in order to assure that its favorite took the throne. In the Guglielmo reading from National Geographic, he describes some of the evidence that we have of Siak-Ak. Fire is born, the Lord of the West, leading an army into the Mayan territory, coming to Tikal and installing a new king. Some of the textual data suggests that Fire is Born was a son of the ruler of Teotihuacan, whom they identify as Spear Thrower Owl. While we don't have names of the rulers of Teotihuacan from Teotihuacan, recorded in Mayan histories is information about these rulers. Now, whether this was an individual or this was the name of the title that was held by a ruler, we are not sure. And whether he was actually the son or just a representative of the ruler, we are not sure. But the Maya believed that he was the son of the ruler of Teotihuacan. We know from inscriptions at Tikal and other nearby sites that Fire is Born and his army arrived at Tikal on January 16th, 378. On that same day, probably not coincidentally, the king of Tikal, Jaguar Pa, died. And First Crocodile, initially called by archaeologists Curl Snout because of the characteristics of the glyph for his name, was installed as the new king by Fire is Born. So one of the questions is, was Curl Snout from Teotihuacan? Was he a foreign king? Almost every depiction of him, he is shown wearing Teotihuacan costume. He is shown as a Teotihuacan warrior. In this depiction, the distinctive headdress and the nose ornament suggests Teotihuacan association. So was he a Teotihuacan king of a Mayan city, or is it the possibility he is the scion of an exiled faction, a faction of Maya elite from Tikal that had lost in an earlier successional struggle and had gone into exile at Teotihuacan, their distant patrons, and then they received support from Teotihuacan to install one of their members as the king, to remove who they believed to be the usurper and false ruler. The apparent willing sacrifice and burial of a Maya king in the summit of the Pyramid of the Moon at Teotihuacan may suggest this latter interpretation, that a Maya king in exile offered himself as a sacrifice to assure the support of Teotihuacan in the installation of one of his offspring as the rightful ruler of Tikal. In the top right, you can see the glyph for First Alligator and why it was initially read as Curl Snout. On this stela, he is depicted again wearing a Teotihuacan-style outfit, this is in 396, 22 years after his installation as ruler. He continued to use various symbols that identified him with the distant power of Teotihuacan and provided him the validity to rule because of this relationship to Teotihuacan. 33 years after being installed as ruler, Karl Snout died and was replaced by his son, Stormy Sky. Then 34 years after Stormy Sky acceded to king, he placed this stela in order to record the dynastic history of Tikal. The front shows Stormy Sky acceding to the throne, flanked on either side of the stela by depictions of his father in Teotihuacan costume. Karl Snout is shown wearing the headdresses of the storm god Teotihuacan, carrying distinctive rectangular Teotihuacan-style shields, one of which is shown with the Teotihuacan storm god upon it. He is still referenced as being a power from this distant city. And the rear of the stela has a glyphic text that records the dynastic history and links Stormy Sky not just to his father, who is influenced apparently and empowered by Teotihuacan, but also links him back to the founding ancestor, suggesting he has relationships to both and derives power from both sources. Stormy Sky wears a corn god headdress, which has within it the glyph of First Shark, the founding king of Tikal. He holds above his head the rain god headdress bearing the glyph of Spear Thrower Owl of Teotihuacan, suggesting his right to possess these symbols of power and authority. These connections to fertility and growth are because of his descent from both of these powerful kings as his ancestors. He holds the head of the jaguar god of the underworld in his other arm, giving him the power of war, and this is all looked down upon and approved of by the sun god. Maya art was not done just to express emotions, just to be aesthetically pleasing. It was done as a means of political propaganda to express and enshrine certain ideas, to communicate these ideas and give them validation. And in this stela, Stormy Sky, the son of a king who is installed by a foreign power, uses art in order to reference the past and provide himself multiple lines of legitimacy, relationship to the founding king of the community, and a relationship to this distant power. Some 300 years later, Tikal would fall to its rival Kalak rule, betrayed by its former ally Dos Pilas, and this stela and all it represented was buried deliberately in order to hide this history and diminish Tikal's power. For 2 generations, Tikal lacked political and economic power on a regional scale, but then it reemerged, and one of the first things that was done was the reinstallation of this stela in a new location of prominence in order to provide a sacred charter for the elites to reestablish their power. And Dos Pilas, the city that betrayed them, felt their wrath. Monuments like Stormy Sky stela were built and installed during the Classic period, and this graph shows the rate of the production of these monuments, which can be seen as measuring the rate of political competition in the region, because these monuments, as propagandistic statements, were intended to bolster the rule of the kings. And we see that they begin in 278 and progress upwards until the mid to late 700s, when there is a dated monuments of this style that are used to create and confirm the power of kings were built in the Maya region. And this is what we refer to as the Maya collapse. Not a loss of the Maya people, but a collapse of these systems of rulership. Deep sea cores from the Caribbean have been used to reconstruct patterns of rainfall in the region and used to identify periods of diminished rainfall or drought. And it's been shown that there were successive severe droughts from the mid-700s to the early 900s that likely impacted the ability of these Maya kingdoms to finance monument construction, to finance their lavish lifestyles, and to finance the wars and competition between kingdoms. These periods of drought differentially affected various areas in the Maya region over time, and there was a progressive abandonment of these large kingly centers across the region. And these different phases of abandonment correspond well to the different periods of drought, suggesting that pulses of drought led to pulses of abandonments. But the drought wasn't the complete and sole cause. Drought was in some ways one of the straws that would break a camel's back, that there were existing stresses in these systems, that the drought simply led to them being unable to maintain, given these new and additional stresses from drought. These were environmental systems that were pushed to their limits, pushed to the limits of their carrying capacity. The landscapes had been modified, were transformed, and there were limits on the availability of certain resources, like wood. As people cleared fields, they removed forest, they needed wood for construction, for firewood, and particularly for the firewood for the manufacture of the lime plaster used to finish these monumental structures. Lime plaster is made by burning limestone, and manufacturing this required large amounts of wood. So these were not pristine environments. They were environments that were already pushed to their limits, and drought would have exceeded these limits. Further, as these large centers were abandoned in one area, where did these populations go? They likely went as refugees to neighboring areas, compounding the problems that existed there, leading to their subsequent abandonment. The initial emergence of social complexity in the Maya region during the pre-classic period was influenced by the earlier developments in the adjacent Olmec region. The Maya adopted the Olmec ideology of rulership, where kings were empowered by their special abilities to move beyond realms, to mediate between the supernatural of the underworld and the earth's surface world that we live upon. They also adopted Olmec systems of writing, expanding and building upon them, allowing them to record great amounts of information that we are now beginning to understand. Later developments in the classic period were influenced by the power of Teotihuacan. We often see the prehistoric past as being small and insular. But that was not the case. These were large-scale systems that integrated people across wide regions, much like modern political and economic systems. One of my critiques of the movie Apocalypto is that it suggests the small scale of these people's lives, that our heroes in the movie come from a small village that is isolated and does not know anything about the large regional center that is less than a day's journey away. That is ridiculous. Peasants in Mayan communities knew of the existence of Teotihuacan hundreds of miles away, and they knew the symbols that were associated with its power, and those symbols were used by some Maya king to reference Teotihuacan to bolster their power. We have evidence of direct interventions in dynastic succession by Teotihuacan, and the Teotihuacan system of Venus warfare was adopted in the Maya region and used to structure competition between kingdoms. Warfare played an important role in the creation and maintenance of the tributary domains of the kings of classic period city-states. There were shifting patterns of alliance and enmity among states, and these patterns of alliance were dominated by two rival superpowers, the United States and Soviet Union of their day, Tikal and Kalak-Mul. Warfare was not just a political and economic competition, it was underwritten by ritual. Warfare was used to provide sacrifices in order to maintain the balance of the universe. Blood was required as a sacrifice by mortal humans as a reciprocal offering to the initial blood that was offered by the gods to create the world and the universe. But it wasn't just the sacrifice of war captives. Maya kings and queens, and even commoners made sacrifices of their own blood in order to reenact this original creative offering of the gods, and in some cases to summon deities and ancestral spirits from the underworld to communicate with them. Successive droughts in the late Classic period contributed to the collapse of these Classic period systems and the abandonment of the major settlements. There were existing stresses of growing populations reaching a maximum carrying capacity, leading to environmental degradation and more intense warfare. Drought and associated declines in agricultural productivity limited the ability of rulers to finance monumental construction of warfare. But this collapse did not occur all at once, but rather in three separate stages over 150 years, as different regions were abandoned and refugees from these abandoned regions would compound the stresses in adjacent regions. The Maya collapse does not mean that the Maya disappeared. Populations declined, but shifted and then reorganized into new communities. There appears to have been a change in the nature of rulership from single autocratic kings to more collective forms with representative councils. And there still are millions of Maya people in Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Belize, and El Salvador, still speaking Maya languages and in some cases still practicing some of the traditional beliefs of their ancestors.